Education has always been accorded an honored place in Indian society. The fundamental role of education for national development has been realized long back during Indian freedom movement. In the post-independence period, a major concern of the government India and of states has been to give increasing attention to education as a factor vital to national progress and security. Problems of educational reconstructions were reviewed by several commissions and committees, and some recommendations were offered and steps were taken to implement the same. Towards the end of the third 5-year plan, a need to hold a comprehensive review of the education system with a view to initiate a fresh and more determined effort at educational reconstructions was identified, and the Education Commission 1964 to 1966 was appointed to advise government. As a result, a consensus on national policy on education has emerged. The National Policy on Education (NPE) is a policy formulated by the Government of India to promote education amongst people. Education is a unique investment in the present and the future. This cardinal principle is the key to national policy on education. The policy covers elementary education to colleges in both rural and urban India. It emphasizes on three aspects in relation to elementary education: universal access and enrollment, universal retention of children up to 14 years of age, and a substantial improvement in the quality of education to enable all children to achieve. Revival of Sanskrit and other classical languages for contemporary use. The National Policy of Education 1968 marked a significant step in the history of education in post-independent India. It aimed to promote national progress, a sense of common citizenship and culture, and to strengthen national integration. It laid stress on the need for a radical reconstruction of the education system to improve its quality at all stages, and gave much greater attention to science and technology, the cultivation of moral values, and a closer relation between education and the life of people. There has been considerable expansion in the educational facilities all over the country at all levels post the implementation of the policy. The most notable development has been the acceptance of common structure of education throughout the country and the introduction of 10 plus 2 plus 3 system by most states. In the school curricula, in addition to laying down a common scheme of studies for boys and girls, science and mathematics were incorporated as compulsory subjects and work experience assigned a place of importance. The policy recognized the fact that education is essential for all. This is fundamental to our all round development, material and spiritual. Education has an acculturating role. It refines sensitiveness and perceptions that contribute to national cohesion, a scientific temper, and independence of mind and spirit, thus furthering the goals of socialism, secularism, and democracy enshrined in our constitution. Though the policy was impressive, it did not get translated into detailed strategy of implementation due to limited financial and organizational support. As a result, the problem of access, quality, quantity, utility, and financial outlay accumulated over years. This program of action is meant to provide an indication of the nature of actions which are needed in order to implement the directions of the policy. It provides a road strategy within which detailed schemes were subsequently drawn up. It also facilitates the preparatory work which will be required before such schemes can be worked out fully and put into operational form. It is necessary to understand that what is presented here is not an inflexible structure but only a projection of directions with varying degrees of detail and can be modified on the basis of experiences and emerging scenarios. Implementation of the programs is a cooperative effort between the center, states, and the communities. Most of the directives of NPE POA have been operationalized by the Union and states. The broad achievements are captured here, and however, this is not a holistic list of achievements, only a few are indicated here. The number of primary schools has increased from 5.29 lakhs in 1985-86 to 5.58 lakhs in 1990-1991, and the number of upper primary schools has increased from 1.35 lakhs to 1.46 lakhs during the same period. The dropout rates declined from 47.61% in 1985-86 to 46.97% in 87-88. In respect of classes 1 to 5th, and from 64.42% in 1985-86 to 62.29% 1987-88 of classes 1 to 8th. However, the data of subsequent years is not available. Non-formal education (NFE) has become an accepted alternative channel for children who cannot attend full-time schools. As per the guidelines in the National Curriculum Framework, the NCERT revised the entire school syllabus and brought out revised textbooks for classes 1 to 7th, and states and union territories have also undertaken measures of curriculum renewal and development of new textbooks for different stages of school education. A positive externality of the total literacy campaigns has been that in many districts covered by the campaign, there has been an upsurge in demand for primary education. Significant developments have taken place in the area of learner achievement. The NPE 1986 spells out minimum levels of learning (MLL) and stated that to promote equality, it will be necessary to provide for equal opportunity to all, not only in access but also in the condition for success. Besides, awareness of the inherent equality of all will be created through the core curriculum. Minimum levels learning will be laid down for each stage of education. The Rehabilitation Council of India (RCI) is an apex government body set up under the Act of Parliament to regulate training programs and courses targeted at the disabled, disadvantaged, and special education requirement communities. It is the only statutory council in India that is required to maintain the Central Rehabilitation Register, which mainly documents details of all qualified professionals who operate and deliver training and educational programs for the targeted communities. In the year 2000, the Rehabilitation Council of India Amendment Act 2000 was introduced and notified consequently by the Government of India. The amendment brought definitions and discussions provided within the earlier Rehabilitation Council of India Act 1992 under the ambit of larger act, namely Persons with Disability, Equal Opportunities, Protections of Rights and Full Participation Act 1995. The Scheme of Inclusive Education for Disabled at a Secondary Stage (IEDSS) was launched in the year 2009-2010. This scheme was a replacement for the earlier Scheme of Integrated Education for Disabled Children (IEDC) and provided assistance for the inclusive education for the disabled children in classes 9 to 12. The main objective of IEDSS is to enable all students with disabilities after completing 8 years of elementary schooling to pursue further 4 years of secondary schooling in an inclusive and enabling environment. The scheme covers all children studying at secondary stage in government, local body and government aided schools with one or more disabilities as defined under the Persons with Disabilities Act 1995 and National Trust Act 1999 in the class 9 to 12, namely blindness, low vision, leprosy cured, hearing impairment, locomotor disabilities, mental retardation, mental illness, autism, and cerebral palsy, and may eventually cover speech impairment, learning disabilities, etc. Girls with disabilities receive special focus to help them gain access to secondary schools, as also to information and guidance for their developing potential. Setting up of model inclusive schools in every state is envisaged. Components. Assistance is admissible for two major components: student oriented components such as medical and educational assessment books and stationery uniforms, transport allowance, reader allowance, stipend girls, support services, assistive devices, boarding and lodging facility, therapeutic services, teaching learning materials, etc. Other components include appointment of special education teachers, allowances for general teachers for teaching such children, teacher training, orientation of school administrators, establishment of resource room, providing barrier-free environment, etc. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan (SSA). Free and compulsory education for all children up to the age of 14 years. Provision of universal elementary education has been a salient feature of national policy since independence. This resolve has been spelled out emphatically in the National Policy of Education (NPE), IWC, and a Program of Action (POA) 1992. A number of schemes and programs were launched in the pursuance of emphasis embodied in the NPE and the POA. Consequent to several efforts, India has made enormous progress in terms of increase in institutions, teachers, and students in elementary education. The country has made impressive achievement in the elementary education sector. There is a significant increase in number of schools enrollment, but the flip side is that out of 200 million children in the age group of 6 to 14 years, 59 million children are not attending schools. Of this, 35 million are girls and 24 million are boys. There are problems relating to dropout rate, low levels of learning achievement, and low participation of girls, tribal and other disadvantaged groups. There are still at least 1 lakh habitations in the country without schooling facility within a kilometer. Coupled with it are various systematic issues like inadequate school infrastructure, poorly functioning schools, high teacher absenteeism, large number of teacher vacancies, poor quality of education, and inadequate funds. Hence, there is still a long way to achieve the goal of universalization of elementary education (UEE), that is 100% enrollment and retention of children with schooling facilities in all habitations. It is to fill this gap that the government has launched Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. The Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan is a long cherished goal of universalization of elementary education (UEE) through a time-bound integrated approach in partnership with the state. SSA aims to improve the elementary education sector of the country and provide useful and quality elementary education to all children in 6 to 14 age group by 2010. The SSA is an effort to recognize the need for improving the performance of the school system and to provide community-owned quality elementary education in mission mode. It also aims to bridge gender and social gaps. The central and state governments together implement the SSA in partnership with the local governments and the communities. States have been requested to establish state-level implementation society for DEE under the chairmanship of Chief Minister and Education Minister, which has already been done in many states. The Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan ensures that there is functional decentralization down to school level in order to improve community participation by recognizing PRIs, tribal councils in scheduled areas, including the Gram Sabha. In 1992, India adopted the Proclamation on the Full Participation and Equality of People with Disabilities in the Asian and Pacific region. As a signatory of this proclamation, India's Ministry of Law, Justice and Company Affairs proposed an act to safeguard the rights of persons with disabilities (PWD). On the 1st of January 1996, the Government of India passed the Persons with Disabilities Equal Opportunities Protection of Rights and Full Participation Act 1995. The act extends to the whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. We have captured few points from the act which are more relevant in our context. In this act, disability is defined as blindness, low vision, leprosy cured, hearing impairment, locomotor disability, mental retardation, and mental illness. The act calls for the government to take the necessary steps to ensure the prevention of disabilities. In accordance with this agenda, the government must screen all the children at least once a year to determine risk factors that lead to disability and attempt to protect the child from such factors. It is also necessary for the state to take measures to reduce risk to prenatal and postnatal mothers and child. Children with disabilities should be provided free education by the appropriate government. The government must take steps to integrate children with disabilities into regular schools, but also make space for special schools that cater expressly to the needs of these children. In addition to the basic education schools, government also required to make non-formal education programs for children with disabilities that help attain literacy, rejoin school, impart vocational training, and provide them with free books and educational material. Teachers need to be specially trained to educate and see the needs of children with disabilities. The government must also set up schemes that provide children with disabilities, grant scholarships, and also provide funds for making buildings disabled friendly. Educational institutions are also required to provide visually challenged students with aids who will write for them. This act may be called the National Trust for the Welfare of Persons with Autism, Cerebral Palsy, Mental Retardation, and Multiple Disabilities Act 1999. The central government may, by notification, appointment, there shall be constituted, for the purpose of this act, a body by the name of National Trust for Welfare of Persons with Autism, Cerebral Palsy, Mental Retardation, and Multiple Disabilities, which shall be a body corporate by the name aforesaid, having perpetual succession and a common seal with power, subject to the provision of this act, to acquire, hold, and dispose of property, both movable and immovable, and contract shall, by the said name, sue or be sued. The general superintendent's direction and management of the affairs and business of the trust shall vest in a board which may exercise all powers and do all acts and things which may be exercised or done by the trust. Vivaco Millennium Framework is for action to promote an inclusive, barrier-free, and right-based society for persons with disabilities in the region. An inclusive society means a society for all, and a barrier-free society means a society free from physical and attitudinal barriers, as well as social, economical, and cultural barriers. A right-based society means a society based on the concept of human rights, including the right to development. Principles and policy directions of the Vivaco Millennium for Act. Enact and enforce legislation and policies related to equal opportunities and treatment of persons with disabilities and their rights to equity in education, health, information and communications, training and employment, social services, and other areas. Such legislation and policies should include persons with all types of disabilities, women and men, people in urban and remote and rural areas. They should be right-based and promote inclusive and multi-sectorial approaches. Include disability dimensions in all new and existing laws, policy plans, programs, and schemes. Establish or strengthen national coordination committees on disability, which will develop and coordinate the implementation and monitoring policies concerning disability with effective participation from organizations and for persons with disabilities. Support the development of persons with disabilities and their organizations and include them in the national policy decision making process on disability with special focus on the development of women with disabilities and their participation in self-help organizations of persons with disabilities as well as mainstream gender initiatives. Ensure that disabled persons be an integral part of efforts to achieve the Millennium Development Goals, particularly in the areas of poverty alleviation, primary education, gender and youth employment. Strengthen national capacity in data collection and analysis concerning disability statistics to support policy formulation and program implementation. Adopt a policy of early intervention in all multi-sectoral areas, including education, health and rehabilitation, and social services for children with disabilities from birth to 4 years. Strengthen community-based approaches in the prevention of causes of disability, rehabilitation, and equalization of opportunities for persons with disabilities. Adopt the concept of universal and inclusive design for all citizens, which is cost effective in the development of infrastructure and services in the areas of inter alia, rural and urban development, housing, transport, and telecommunication. Persons with physical and mental disabilities have been the target of discrimination across cultures for thousands of years. Discrimination against persons with disabilities takes various forms, ranging from invidious discrimination, such as the denial of education opportunities, to more subtle form of discrimination, such as segregation and isolation because of the imposition of physical and social barriers. On virtually every continent, there are records of isolation, exclusion, and even destruction of persons with disabilities. Governmental treatment of persons with disabilities, beginning with their placement in institutions and moving slowly into the education system and workplace, is relatively recent pattern. Every country has laws in place to ensure proper education is provided to disabled and their human rights are secured. Few acts related to education of disabled in other countries are Individuals with Disabilities Education Act (IDEA), Equality Act 2006, Disability Discrimination Act 2005, Disability Discrimination Public Authorities Statutory and Duties Regulations 2005 serial number 2966, Special Educational Needs and Disability Act 2001, Education Act 1996, Disability Discrimination Act 1995, No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, Education for the Handicapped Act EHA PL 94 to 142. International treaties that are binding on states and create legal obligations to the states' parties. All international human rights instruments protect the human rights of persons with disability as they apply to all persons. This principle of universality is reinforced by the principle of equality and non-discrimination, which are included in human rights instruments. Some international and regional human rights conventions protect the rights of persons with disability specifically or have provisions concerning the persons with disabilities. These include ILO Convention concerning vocational rehabilitation and employment of disabled persons, Inter-American Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against persons with disabilities, Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 23, African Charter of Human and People's Rights, Article 18, Sub 4, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, Article 13, European Social Charter, Article 15, Protocol of San Salvador, Additional Protocol to the American Convention of Human Rights in the area of economic, social, and cultural rights, Article 6 and 9. International instruments that are non-binding such as declarations and rules and are useful in interpreting international standards and implementing them in national legislation. Several disability specific non binding international instruments have been adopted at the international level. The instruments include Declaration of the Rights of Mentally Retarded Persons, Declaration on the Rights of Disabled Persons, World Programme of Action Concerning Disabled Persons, Tallinn Guidelines for Action on Human Resource Development in the Field of Disability, Principles for the Protection of Persons with Mental Illness and Improvement of Mental Health Care, Standard Rules on the Equalization of Opportunities for Persons with Disabilities, ILO Recommendation concerning Occasional Rehabilitation of the Disabled, ILO Recommendation concerning Occasional Rehabilitation and Employment of Disabled Persons. Persons with disability often are excluded from the mainstream of the society and denied their human rights. Effects of disability based discrimination have been particularly severe in fields such as education, employment, housing, transport, cultural life, and access to public places and services. This may result from distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference, or denial of reasonable accommodation on the basis of disablement, which effectively nullifies or impairs the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise of the rights of persons with disabilities. Governments have implemented various laws at national and state level to ensure that rights of people with disability are protected. In fact, every country had made laws to protect the rights of their disabled people. Also, special emphasis has been given to ensure that education is accessible to them. There are laws at international levels also which are binding on all states. However, there are certain cultural and social barriers that have served to deter participation of persons with disabilities. Changes in the perception and concepts of disabilities will involve both changes in values and increased understanding at all levels of society. One of the dominant features of legal thinking in the 20th century has been the recognition of law as a tool of social change. Though legislation is not the only means of social progress, it represents one of the most powerful vehicles of change, progress, and development